Hello, and welcome to The Confident Commit, the podcast for anyone who wants to join the conversation about how to deliver software faster and better.
If you're looking to build a test and ship, tune in, let's confidently commit.
And today, I'm excited to have two guests with me, and we're going to do something a little bit different. We've got two members of the CircleCI team who've been with us for varying amounts of time over what is now our 10-year history. So in reflection on our 10-year anniversary, we want to take a little bit of time and talk about what it's been like on that journey, or in some cases, what it's like to be joining now. So I'm joined today by Gordon Syme, senior staff software engineer in our organization, who is our longest tenured employee. Has been here just over 8 years. And Jean-Philippe LeBlanc, who is one of our newer employees, Senior Vice President of Engineering, just recently took over managing the entire engineering organization from me, and has been here 5 weeks now, JP?
6, yeah, that's right.
6.
5 weeks done, starting my 6th.
Well, congratulations. Congratulations on 6 weeks and 8+ years to the two of you. Thanks for joining me today. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Glad to be here.
Yeah,
so, all right, well, let's go back to the, I'm your host, Rob Zuber, CTO of CircleCI, industry leader for all things CI and CD. I guess that's important. Hopefully, if you're on episode 11, you've listened to 1 or 2 before, so you know who I am, but I should get better at that. Awesome. Well, let's get into it. So I'm going to start with Gordon because we're going to talk about history for a second, although over a chunk of this time, JP, you were also a customer of CircleCI and building other engineering organizations. So no doubt paying attention to what was happening in CI/CD. But Gordon both interviewed me as part of the process of joining CircleCI and was sort of my, I'll say, onboarding buddy, because we worked on the same project of integrating iOS into the CircleCI platform. So Gordon, you're the only one that can tell us, what was it like when you first started at CircleCI? So 8 years. Well, what was your actual start date?
So I started July 15th, 2013.
2013. So
2013. Yep.
A little under 2 years, right, into the life of the company. Yeah. And so, paint us a little picture. What was it like? How many people were here? What was the kind of picture and vision from that perspective?
Right. So when I joined, CircleCI was a lot smaller than it is now. There were the 2 co-founders and 4 employees, I guess, in that company when I joined. So came in, pretty early on. I mean, the biggest difference is, like, back then you could go to a restaurant and fit the entire company around a table, right? So, I mean, I guess it's typical sort of startup things, like you just do all of the jobs, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons I joined is because I'm based in Ireland. It is literally that time zone advantage. I mean, the company was looking for someone who would be awake when everyone in North America was asleep, because, you got to do the operations and the customer support and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it was just the range of everything. I'd start my day, I'd have maybe 4 hours before anybody else in the company was awake. And in those 4 hours, I'd code as much as I could. I'd do support when it needed to. I mean, social media, they had me do, I could do the social media stuff during my morning, which, if you know me, it would be a surprise. And yeah, the support, we had a live support hip chat room back when, that was long enough ago that hip chat was a thing. So yeah, it's literally everything.
Yeah, well, you mentioned a couple times in there doing all the things, and one thing that came up a couple times that I often talk about, and from my early days even at the company, which was a little over a year later when I joined, was the support piece, right? And really being directly in contact with customers, which is a thing that shifts. For anybody listening, we're a little over 650 people now. We definitely have someone else managing our social media at this point, which is probably great. But what is that particular journey like in terms of staying in touch with the customer? You've been part of the mission for a really long time, probably have a really good sense of what customers need, but our customers have changed also over the course of that journey. So how do you think about that connection, what connection you had directly with customers then, and how do you think about that now?
So back then, I guess it was really easy to know what customers wanted because there weren't that many of them, and they would just tell you, right, just straight up. It's like, so it was very easy to be aware of what was causing problems for people and what sort of features they were looking for. These days, I guess like part of the company getting bigger is that the scope of my domain has shrunk a lot. Like I'm not doing social media, as you say, or running customer support or anything like that anymore. So it is, as an engineer, I guess it is a bit more difficult to have that, sort of direct sense of what people want. But on the flip side, we have our product organization, and I mean, they're doing that now. They do a much better job than I ever could. So to get to lean on that and help, I guess, guide and direct what we're working on.
Well, and I guess to the point of customer count going from, well, I talked to the customer and I know what they're looking for, to, aggregating the views of many, many different customers and what kinds of issues are floating to the surface, or what kind of goals are floating to the surface, balancing that against longer term direction and vision, and all the things that product managers do, which is great. So speaking of customers, JP, we alluded a couple times to the fact that that you have been a customer, I think, multiple times of CircleCI. So let's just take a snapshot, so we can get a picture of that. In around this time, 2011, when the company was just starting, where were you at? What were you doing? And how in tune with CI and CD were you?
I was just trying to go in my head, where was I in 2011, 12, 13? And it's a completely different world. I was working for a smallish company in Montreal called Radio Point. We're in the security business for telcos. But I still remember to this day, this humongous wall that we have with our build array. We custom develop our own build machines. And then we have a bunch of system administrators that would take those builds and deploy them in our data centers and so on and so forth. So up until I would say 2014, that was the way of the world. That's how we operated. It cost a bundle. It requires a lot of deep knowledge. Everything was custom made. And we started using other things, other tools, right? Everybody remembers the salt stack and things like that. So we built around that. It's only for me in 2015 that I had my first crack at CircleCI. Still remember kind of a magical moment of, kind of used to the slugging away at it. And now you're actually facing with a much simpler, way more simpler, even though you can kind of debate how effective and efficient it was, but you can feel it. Something was shifting. It was kind of a magical way of actually understanding what is CI and what is CD. So that for me was 2015, super magical. And then throughout from 2015 to all the way now up until like even this year, I have been a customer of CircleCI in various degrees, right? From my Shutterstock days, doing a lot of proof of concept, and the Montreal team was on that stack, to Lightspeed. We had CircleCI. And one of the main things we wanted to achieve is just one single pane of glass that manages your CI and your CD. And that was kind of where I put the most value in terms of the last few years. But was super interested to see the shift and the evolution of CircleCI from being a rather small company trying to really change the world in CI/CD to what it is now, 650 strong. I'm now there. Looking at it here, like with Gordon was there like 10 years ago or so. So this is actually quite interesting to see the complete evolution, because it follows how we're building software today. So super stoked.
Well, so Gordon alluded to joining the company because he was in Ireland. I'm sure there's more to that story, which we'll come back to in one second. But you're joining at a very, very different time, as you just said. What was it that was really key to you in terms of being excited about the opportunity to jump in?
So first of all, I was a customer, so I knew the product fairly well, from all of the goodness, also all of the a little bit of the faults and the little bit of the weaknesses of the product. So I came from a educated point of view from the product standpoint. But for me, there's twofold. First of all, just the organization itself was probably some of the better conversation I've had with some of the people. I've met a lot of companies in the last few years. It was pretty interesting conversation, very humble individuals that I've met with. And you can feel that percolating through the entire organization, all the people I've met. And that was kind of that was the sticky point. That was the thing that actually made, yeah, this is an interesting environment to work in. And the other part is like the CI/CD world is finally resonating in the world. It was kind of niche, not a lot outside of software delivery organization. Not a lot of people knew about CI/CD. The word DevOps it was a very bloated word. It means a lot to different people. But now this entire industry and this entire space is starting to resonate a lot more outside of software delivery. Companies are now paying attention as a real way to actually be more effective, more efficient, cut costs, be more secure, all of this. And this is where very interesting play to actually get into that business and go deeper in there, because it is still very immature and infantile. There's still so much to do in that space. So I figured like, yeah, humble organization, great space, a lot of complexities to tackle, and a great set of people. So those are the main reason why I joined CircleCI.
Right on. Well, so after joking about it, let's go back a second. I mean, you just talked about how well understood CI and CD is now, are both in terms of those particular tools, our understanding of how critical the software delivery process is, et cetera. Now roll back 8+ years, Gordon. Was that the thing that really sold you, or was there something else? I mean, a very different place. When there's 6 people, a lot of it is just, do I believe this story sort of thing? I mean, that's my experience with early startups. So what was the compelling thing for you?
So I guess an important bit of context is I worked for Amazon before I worked for Circle. Amazon is like the opposite, I guess, almost of the two things. But like we were living and breathing CI and CD in Amazon for the whole time that I was there, right? The tools were, I mean, they were a little bit rough at the edges sometimes, but they could do a lot of very advanced, awesome stuff. And it really seemed like the builder tools team that got to build those, they just got to have a lot of fun, I guess, and build things that everyone else in the company who I was like talking to was like, yes, this thing is amazing. Then this opportunity came up to join Circle, and I kind of had to take it, and get in there and build some of those things.
Right on. Well, that's very cool, and I think that's a certainly a common story for a lot of, I'll call them developer tools, but maybe software tools that end up getting built by small companies. Is people have a really great experience in a large organization that has great tooling, and then think, how can I make this available to organizations that can't invest in that tooling themselves, right? That's not another Amazon. Was there anything that was sort of uniquely different or interesting in those days as you came from the world of, one of the things that's nice about being one large single organization is you can solve the problem exactly your way and tell everyone we're going to do it this way, as opposed to trying to solve for the needs of a bunch of different teams building things differently. Was there anything particularly interesting or different that you had to think about then shifting to, providing this to many, many customers? That
is a great question. I mean, for me, Amazon was kind of an aberration in my career. I'd always worked for small companies up until Amazon. So part of it was just wanting to get back to that small company feel. I don't know if that really answers your question. I think I was more trying to get something I'd had before and work on some cool stuff that I'd experienced.
Yeah, well, I'm actually thinking about from the customer perspective, right? So Amazon could have, I assume, fairly rigid practices, right? Our CI and CD works because you build things exactly this way, as opposed to you could build whatever you want and then you can come build it on CircleCI. So does that change the way that you think about building software? Does it change the way that you think about approaching the customer, in the sense that you're trying to, often in these cases, particularly, I'll call 2013 early days of CI and CD, even though it's 20+ years into the notion of CI, but guiding customers, right? So like the balance of, here's a really opinionated view of how we think you should do it, but actually you have some different opinions and those are pretty good and we want to be able to support them. Like how do you strike that balance?
Right. So that is pretty tricky. Because you can't really tell someone that they're building it wrong. I mean, they're building it the way they need to build it for their business and their customers. And I guess early on we had a bit of an advantage because you get frameworks like Rails. Like Rails provides that opinion for you, right? Anyone who's using Rails is bought into, I guess, an opinionated way of building software. So that was a bit of an advantage early on. There were a couple of tools like that, different frameworks for different languages, but it's very much evolved, and it's very clear that customers want the power to do what they need to do and not what we tell them to do. So there are some things we know that like maybe this is a better way of structuring it, but fundamentally we can try and make those paths easier for people perhaps, or try and guide them towards them. But ultimately they need to build the software that they need to build. So we need to try and provide all the different optionality and power and expressiveness for them to do that.
Right. And I think that's, I mean, haven't been here 8 years, but I've been here close to it. That's been a big part of the journey, right? Is software has evolved so dramatically. You talk about Rails, right? I mean, I was building a different company in 2011. And lo and behold, we were building a Rails monolith. Like it was kind of the thing, right? That's what everyone was doing.
Right, and if you go back far enough in Circle's history, there was a brief time where Circle was a Rails monolith. So.
I think I managed to find one of those commits at some point. Yeah, like that was the model, right? That's what everybody did. And then I think around 2014, which is when I ended up joining along with Jim, we were building CI and CD for iOS and for mobile. And that was a point in time where there was this kind of transition into mobile first, right? Or it was a little bit after that transition, but it was starting to become apparent that mobile was really critical. And then Docker came along, and then everyone wanted to build services, and just how we built software changed so much. And being able to support that, we can't still tell people, well, just build a Rails monolith and this will work perfectly, right? So it's been an exciting evolution. JP, you mentioned where you were, but and having a very custom build fleet. What was your stack in 2011? Was it what were you working on back then?
Java and C++ application. So a lot of builds that had to happen on that one. A little bit of mobile development, not a lot back then. And there was a lot, given that we were in the security space, a lot of our build system was all about testing for security purposes. So there was a lot of that done. And so very, again, opinionated, so tightly built for us, by us. That was the way. But then the world kind of shifted under us, where the speed in which you had to deliver software kind of changed. Where you could do like back in the days, we could do a couple of releases a year, and that was good enough. And that really shifted, like as far as I'm on my side, my point of view is like it shifted quite drastically in those days, where the speed and the time to market shifted. And this is where what we had built originally actually couldn't hold up. It would require so many more build systems, so many other more Mac minis in that build array, way more Windows machine everywhere. And this is where the shift to the cloud and using the cloud to actually start building this. So it was a very interesting time, but you can really see rapidly that can scale, and the way you've been doing for the past decade actually will not suffice for the purpose of the future. So it was a pretty interesting time to actually start repurposing mindset. And for me, it was mostly less technological, because tools were coming about, and mostly like people's mindset of how you should be building software, deploying software, packaging software. That was actually a much harder journey, trying to re-educate people, retool individuals, and retool teams in terms of learning all that. So that was my 2013 to 2015. That was my 3 years of trying myself relearn how to do it, and also then teaching and mentoring and supporting and grooming people to actually start adopting those practices. Fun times.
Well, I love that tie into culture. I mean, it's so much of what needs to be achieved to get software delivery done well, to get CI and CD done well, right? You can buy all the tools, you can buy the best tools, but if you don't have the culture to support it, then you're not going to be able to succeed, right? And now a lot of people understand this stuff really well. I remember the day or my first week or whatever when I got to CircleCI, sort of saying, coming from building a CI and CD platform, but we were building for mobile. And so in mobile, you have to put it in the handsets of a few testers and then get it into the app store, and then you wait for weeks, saying, wait a second, if I click this merge button, this thing's in production. That's what's going to happen next, right? And sort of everyone's like, yeah, what would you expect to happen? And thinking, that sounds awesome, but that's not how a lot of the world works, right? So I'm curious, and I think about, IMVU, or I'm not actually sure how to pronounce the name of that company, but like the early days of CD was only 2009, 2010, something like that, like where people were talking about it. And I remember them getting a lot of negative feedback on the idea. And so in 2011, to be building that, and right away, first steps of CircleCI, the first bits of code are being pushed directly into production. So, I mean, Gordon, you're saying you're coming from Amazon. I'm going to call it Amazon. I just did like the Gordon pronunciation. But one of the things that was so attractive to you was you were already doing that. But I think that was a little bit of an outlier in those days, right? So where were the customers coming from? The ones that were like, yeah, totally, let's just ship on every merge.
That is a great question. So I guess, when I joined Circle, it was like 2013, so there's a bit of extra time for the ideas to become established. But like back then, we didn't do that much marketing. I think there's a reasonable amount of, word of mouth and other things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's totally true. Like people were pushing to production, like even back in those early days. So it must have been catching on. And I guess, we'd have people, they'd come by our HipChat channel. They'd ask us, I remember one person actually dropped in and was like, what is CI and CD?
In the support channel?
Yeah, in our just dropped right into the public support channel, like, what is CI and CD? Which is like an interesting, start going through all the explanations and whatever. So what I didn't ask him, and I should have done now in retrospect, is where he even heard of CircleCI and like what got him to come to us and ask us that question. Because, yes, it'd be a really interesting data point. So I think it was just that growing movement of people looking to do CD. They'd heard about it. They'd heard of the CI and CD thing and mm-hmm. didn't want to build it themselves. And I guess San Francisco is a fairly small, community of startup-minded folks who are willing to take a punt on these kind of things. So it feels like we sort of grew out of that community mostly around San Francisco and started expanding outwards kind of as we went.
Right. Well, that was so Distiller was the iOS platform. That was a little bit of our model. We were much smaller at the point that we joined CircleCI, but we just went door to door almost. We went to meetups and said, "Hey, we have this tool. You should probably use it." And it absolutely is that community. And sometimes I forget, the bubble, I guess, that I'm living in here. So many small companies, so many, tech forward companies thinking about these kinds of things. Rob,
you were in a bubble where I was faced with trying to change, not the developer mindset, but mm-hmm. the leadership and engineering management mindset, which is extremely frightening. When from that perspective, in 2013, 14, when you talk to them, like bits of code is going to reach production automatically, right, through a pipeline. Mm-hmm. That was a scary thought, where it was a very easy, I would say, management in their brain to manage just a gated process. That's easy because you control at any gate with a bunch of humans, right? You test this, you throw it over to an operator. An operator will deploy it somewhere, right, with more tests. And if it doesn't go back, there's a bunch of rollback scripts that they roll in with. Not that, and explaining to them that you have to take that leap of faith. Not easy. That was the hardest part, was to convince the rest of the leadership and management, which are like older folks, right? This is where you're now a VP of engineering. Back then, you had like tenure, like 20 years at IBM or somewhere else. So these concepts were hard to grasp.
And I'm fascinated. So I don't know how many people who listen to this know, but I'm originally from Toronto and I moved to the Bay Area in 2000. And I remember the first time I visited, I felt like I was living in a cave almost in Toronto. Like, we were doing great things. We were building a company, all this, but then we went to some conference, I think, in San Francisco. It was Java 1, in fact. And like my mind was blown by the things that people were doing. And so I'm curious if there's like, and it's, you know, it feels so weird in the age of the internet to feel like information was taking longer to get to us. But was there, do you feel like being based in Montreal, like being a little further from this bubble, there was like more of a delay in adoption, less kind of, you know, people paying attention to forward-looking practices about software development?
Absolutely. I would say, where are we now? 10 years ago or so. I think now it's almost immediate.
Mhm.
Back then, I would say there was still a chasm in between the practices. There was a lot less information about it, and perhaps I was in the wrong circle. Who knows, right? Meeting the wrong people that were not in the right conversation. But then overall, I would say I think there was a delay. I think there was a delay back then, and that what created most of the anxiety. It was hard because people have not heard of it, and they search about it, and it's not that much information that is coming from, you know, the tried and true voices of technology back then. It was still fairly niche. So when you look at your typical publication, you would start to hear about it, but cover page was like, yeah, that company, humongous, tried and true Bank of America is using. You didn't get those, so it felt a little awkward and weird to use these tech. But this is where it rapidly shifted. This is where it was the hardest on the human side. Is like, how do you adapt that? And that was interesting. That for me, because that's where I step in and actually make those change management. But it was fun.
Right on. So we've covered a lot of kind of the 10-year span. We'll skip the history before that, although it's probably equally fascinating, like all the reasons people didn't do this earlier. But so let's start with Gordon. I mean, you're 8 years in. It's a pretty different place. Based on everything we've described, CI has been solved, right? I mean, everybody does CI now. CD, lots of people do. I mean, everybody. We'll just refer to my bubble again. But you know, we're pretty deep into this journey. So I've solved a lot of interesting problems. What's kind of fresh and exciting? Like, what's the next step that you're excited about that keeps you, you know, motivated to show up and work on these problems for folks?
Wow. The next big thing, I guess it's taking that idea of working out that code is good, you know, and extending it as far as you can, because these days, everybody knows unit tests are not enough, right? I mean, they're going to catch a lot. Hopefully they'll catch that bug. But I don't know, the thing. I remember when I first pressed, you know, that merge button, you know, something's going into production. It's like, well, what if it all breaks? And the person with me was like, well, have you written the test that makes sure it won't? And it's like, well, I'd like to think I have, but you know, so there's going that extra bit. I mean, it's the observability. It's like seeing, is this code actually performing the way we expect it to? Is it really, you know, good like we thought it was? And if it's not, what should we do? I mean, even this is coming back to my days at Amazon. I mean, I got used to systems like that. I could point them at some metrics and say, right, if this goes bad, don't page me, just roll it back. You know, so we want to, yeah. I mean, I'm excited by bringing that to more people. I mean, as you say, the constraints are very different. The environments are hugely varied. It's not as easy a problem, but the benefit is real, and it's really exciting. And certainly as someone who carries a pager, I mean, this thought of systems that will look after you and let you stay in bed is very appealing.
Well, I love that notion. You know, as someone who carries a pager, I think so much of what we're able to think about. One of the things that's cool about working at a company like CircleCI is you're solving problems for people who are in very much the same position as you, right? Like, I want to be able to sleep through the night and know that my systems are going to take care of themselves. And I want other people to be able to sleep through the night and know that their systems are going to be able to take care of themselves. And it kind of goes all the way back to that connection with the customer, right? It's a little bit of an easy end run in a sense that I am the customer in many regards. Are there kind of any other big motivators even that you've had over the last 8 years, or you think about into the future in terms of like, this is just the problem that I want to solve for me, and I'm really glad that it's going to solve it for a lot of other people? Any other kind of big problems that way?
So a big one for me actually was workflows. interestingly enough. I found an email a while back that I wrote in, I think it might have been August 2013, describing this system that I wanted to build to do this stuff, right? Because I missed it. Yeah, it took a lot longer to get there. I'd like to think we finally did, or close enough. But yeah, that was another, like, I know this will be good for people. I know people will want it because I want it. And, you know, I mean, I'm a customer, I guess.
Well, you know, it's so funny that you mentioned that, because that story makes perfect sense to me. But for many, if you weren't a customer back then, because we have more customers now than we did then, we had a build, right? A single build, and it was from one end to the other. You got one container. Everything was well, you could get multiple containers in parallel, but they were exactly the same. They were the image that we provided, because Docker didn't exist, and it was built on top of LXC, and it was, you know, was what we could achieve. And it was just end to end. One thing, there were some steps, but there was no dependency. There was no fan out, fan in, like all of the things that you've come to expect from a workflow today, which we provide. It's also funny to me hearing these stories, because everything that we end up talking about, I'm like, I remember Gordon working on that. Oh, I remember Gordon working on that. Just a sign. So what about you, JP? As you think about, you know, the next 10 years, what are you excited about in terms of, you know, where software delivery is going, how we play a role in that, whatever?
Yeah. And I love the illusion, like we used to think in a pipeline way. And I think a lot of folks are still, we're not the entire world is thinking it's more than just a pipeline of like gated steps that one after the other that reaches an end state of I'm in production, right? So the idea of a workflow is quite interesting. It still has a long way to go into people's brain. And it's actually how do you execute with that in mind? So for me, it's like looking at code, which is, the world of CI has always originated from like, I have lines of code on my laptop, on my desktop. I'm actually collaborating with others and things get merged, and then things happen. Tests, scans, packaging, deployment, releases, things happen to my code. And then once it's there, a bunch of changes. But for me, it's more the ecosystem and environment that actually is continually evolving, meaning there are changes that are not just code that happen, that needs to be validated in the world. And what's the role of CI, which is continuously integrating things, not just code, but changes. There's always changes. Back then, 10 years ago, much less, very static kind of world. 2021, and I'm probably forecasting in 2025, it will be a very dynamic world we live in, with constant change happening almost in real time with your code in production. And the ecosystem, because no longer you're building everything yourself. You're using dependencies, you're using other tools, other system, a bunch of distributed workforce. All of these changes is what needs to be continuously integrated as far as I'm concerned. That's what exciting for me is, how do you actually transform CI into just like, yeah, I'm integrating code, to I'm integrating an ecosystem of a bunch of things happening. And no one can actually prescribe and be very deterministic and like, oh, these are the 5 things that will change. I think today we can probably list 1,000 areas that will change, and tomorrow probably going to be 1 million. So creating those workflows that are getting more and more intelligent to handle these events, that's where I see the future. That's why like so interesting to be part of this, because I still see CI/CD as again, very early on in its stage, very on in software delivery. A lot more we can actually accomplish, given that the world is rapidly again changing.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. I think there's been some very strong market forces, big market shifts in the 10 years that we've been doing this, just in terms of how people think about what they're delivering, right? Using that model of, oh, I have some code, it's going to go through these gates, it's going to get into a production environment. And you know, one of the things that I end up talking about a lot is services, right? And the positive things that we've done for our engineering teams by encapsulating the bits they need to think about, but we've taken complexity and pushed it out to other places where sometimes we don't even know that it's there. And then, as you're describing, we're using more and more of stuff that exists out in the world, right? I mean, early in my career, we were still writing our own parsers Not a lot of people spend their days writing parsers these days, right? Like you take all this stuff off the shelf, you probably actually just make an API call to someone else for their
Right.
parsing and get
Right.
back a result. And those people are changing their software all the time, right? So the kind of ability to have a really fixed view of what you're working on is just it's gone, right? As you just have to accept that that's a thing that you don't have anymore, and then try to build a system and a delivery capacity that allows you to work in that environment.
If we kid ourselves, Rob, if people look at engineering leaders today, if they think that their world is static and they can actually frame it, they're kidding themselves. That means they're just like pushing things that they don't want, because it is very hard to do that leap in terms of like, all right, I no longer have 100% control of all of the changes happening in my ecosystem. And that should be okay, because this is where you have guardrail, you have test bed. This is where how you control it back is up to you based on the workflow you want to produce in terms of software delivery. But let's not kid ourselves. Like now we don't know. We can't control everything that happened in the ecosystem anymore.
I mean, I think it's actually what's allowed so many cool companies, technologies, whatever you want to call them, to evolve, is that we're constantly standing on the shoulders of giants, right? We're so abstracted away from the problems that we had to solve 30 and 40 years ago in computers. Most people don't even know how a lot of that stuff works, because you don't have to think about it all day long, right? And so you have these levels of abstraction, but at the same time, what enables that is this constant change within that ecosystem, right? So just, I mean, if you want complete control, I was thinking you should probably be working on like microcontrollers or something. Like you need to be really, really close to the metal. And even then someone's going to change something on you underneath, right? So just accepting it and then enjoying the freedom and building your tooling appropriately. So Gordon, as you look forward, is there anything in particular that you think is going to be challenging for us, challenging for the software development community as a whole as we continue to evolve down this path?
Yeah, and I guess it sort of ties into what JP was saying. I complexity, like taming the complexity of these evolving systems is like, it's getting hard already. I think it's going to get harder if we don't actually take steps to try and simplify all this stuff. So like however many years ago, when I started my career, we had a stack of like 5 or 6 1U server boxes in like coffee table in the corner of the room. And it's like, yeah, it's a couple of machines there. We can understand them. We can manage them. It's fine. And then like the cloud comes along and the promise is like, okay, don't need to do infrastructure anymore. And that's great. But what, as you say, we keep on building these more complex things. They let us move faster. They let us develop stuff more quickly. But, we've got Kubernetes now, which is essentially we've built the infrastructure on top of the infrastructure. We're managing this infrastructure now, and it's enabled us to do a lot. But, it's this extra complexity that we're adding. I was looking at some AWS docs a while back, and they said, obviously, for your needs, you should consult your network engineering team. And I was like, wait, wasn't the cloud meant to take my network engineering team away? Wasn't that the point? But it's not. It did 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, because we weren't building these complicated ecosystems of everything. So I think, yeah, taming that complexity so that we can still work with it as the change just increases and gets faster and faster and faster, I think is probably the biggest thing for me.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I guess to carry us out here, JP, I'm going to ask a similar question. I really like what you touched on there, Gordon, around, needing to understand. We'll use the example of the network engineer. I've given all this stuff away, but at some point I actually need to understand how it works. And so, you can think of what we do in that same regard, right? We're trying to take all the complexity out of getting a CI and CD platform to work well, up and running for you so you can go focus on your business. But then at some point, you need to understand that really well. So how do you think about solving that as we continue to evolve and as our customers continue to evolve, JP, in terms of, taking all of that complexity away, but then, giving either the engineer or in your case, the leader, right, who's also a customer and thinks about what's happening in the system as a whole, giving them the right tools to solve their specific problem when it becomes a specific problem for them?
Yeah, it's a good question, because we have to walk that fine line between, you don't need to know exactly how all of the low-level secret sauce is happening. You need to know enough, but I think what's important is to give feedback in terms of what's happening actually, right? You don't need to know how to drive a car as long as I know what speed I'm going, what's the oil, what's the gas, and all that fun stuff. Same way into the world CI/CD. I think we need to provide way more data point, way more from data, way more insights, recommendation, automation to give people the ability to decide and choose. Yes, I need to dig deeper, right? I need to go there, change that area, change that script, change that test. This is a flaky test. And perhaps someday somewhere we'll have a self-healing test, right? That used to be flaky. Now it's better just because we've changed some variables in it. So I think for me, it's giving back way more feedback back to for the developers, but also the engineering leadership and management team. Because it's not just, it's somewhat easy to manage one workflow, one piece of code, right? Few developers. When we start to have 10, 15, 20 teams, 5, 6 different product technology stacks, and you need to have a overall feel of what's going on with all of your CI/CD ecosystem. This is where we need, again, providing more information, more feedback, more data point for people to actually make better, bigger decisions from both a technology standpoint and also a business standpoint. So, we can educate all the humans in our organization to move forward. So for me, data, feedback, insight, recommendation, all of that. I mean, it's the same thing we've been saying for like 10 years and 20 years now, more data, but it's time to actually actualize it. I mean, now we're getting way more used to dashboarding and doing all this. Now it's actually time to actually get more deeper into the CI/CD in terms of data and insights.
Yeah, I love that perspective, and I think separating data from insights is really like we are all drowning in data. I think we're at this kind of low point in that shift where, yes, we've made all the data available to ourselves and to others in every domain, and we're starting to find the tools and get better at actually teasing out the knowledge and insight that we need to go do things differently, right? Or to have things change for the better on their own. Awesome. I love that perspective. Thanks to both of you for taking the time to join me and talk about this. It's been a fun journey. I'm looking forward to the next 10, although for me it's 7, but we'll call it the next 10 because it'll be the next 10 of this company. And I guess huge thanks to all of our customers who've been with us over the 10 years, or not everyone has been with us over the 10 years. That would be weird, but who've joined us over the 10 years. Couldn't do it without you. And we're all very passionate and excited about continuing to solve the problems of all of you, our customers, over the next 10 and then some. Everybody who's listening today, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this, share it with your friends. Subscribe on your podcasting platform of choice. I guess not podcasting, podcast consumption platform of choice. And if you're interested in us talking about anything particular on this show, hit us up on Twitter at CircleCI. Again, Gordon, JP, thanks so much for joining me today, and happy 10th anniversary.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Gordon. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you, Rob.